Hello and welcome to this webinar today, Fluency with Teams and Office 365, hosted by the team at Lancaster University on behalf of the ucisa Digital Capabilities Group. I hope everybody's well. I know we've got many people joining us who attended our previous webinar back in April, which feels like a world away now, doesn't it, if we think back to what the world was like in April when all this started. Today's webinar, the first thing to say, is quite different from the April one. Back in April, we set out just to help the community by offering some training and support and advice about usage. Today's webinar is more about giving you just an update on some of the things that we've got in train at Lancaster and some of our developments, but also to have a bit of a community discussion, to get some feedback from you, to share the results of that with you, and to have some discussion about some important topics about where we take the good practice and the learning from the last several months and where that goes in the future. So before we go any further, just to introduce the team. So I'm Ben, I'm a digital skills developer at Lancaster, and I'm also a committee member of the ucisa DCG. My colleague Lydia joins us, she's a digital skills developer. We're also joined by Stephen and Dale from the digital learning team, who've been working, like everybody, incredibly hard this year. I'm sure there's many digital learning facilitators joining us on the call today as well, who can sympathise with Dale and Stephen on that. And we're also joined by Peter and Tony, who work in the communication and collaboration team. So they, this is a real oversimplification, but they manage the technical aspects of Office 365 implementation at Lancaster, among many other things as well. So you've got hopefully the benefits of our combined wisdom on the call today. In terms of what we're planning to cover, I'm going to give you an overview first of all of, like I said, some of our capability developments, in terms of key developments, in terms of features as well. So things that we've seen come on stream in Teams and the rest of Office 365 in the recent months that have been really well utilised and well liked by our staff and students. And then a little bit about what we've got planned next based on what we've learned since March. And then we're going to open up a discussion. So we're going to give you an opportunity to have your say. We've got a quick snap forms survey to send out to discuss the results of. And then we're planning on having some discussions around the future of virtual learning environments and the future of communications, including email as well. Please do use the Teams live event Q&A if you do have questions about anything at any time. So during this introductory part, for the next 20 minutes or so, my colleagues will all be monitoring the Q&A and will do their best to publish and answer any questions that you might have about anything. And then in the second half of this session, the discussion section, please do use that Q&A as a space to add comments if you want to, giving your thoughts and your input. So yeah, your thoughts and questions are very, very welcome in today's session. We want this to be as interactive as possible. Now, I've reused a slide here from that webinar we did back in April, just to help set the scene and the context for you for Lancaster University. So we're a university in the northwest of England, approximately 3,000 staff and approximately 16,000 students. And we have Office 365 available to all of those staff and students. Everybody has the ability in Teams to create teams. So we have a completely open team creation policy. We don't vet that in IT services at all. And we also allow open federation, so we can talk to other organisations as well. So we've taken an open approach in terms of the implementation of Teams, and I think that that's been proved, hopefully, during COVID to be a great success, that approach, because it's meant organic development and organic growth of the Office 365 suite and features throughout the organisation. We did start a full training program and started rolling Teams out to all staff and students during 2019. So that did give us a little bit of a head start before COVID, in terms of the fact that a lot of our staff were beginning to develop the capabilities in Office 365. Though it's fair to say that there were still many gaps pre-COVID, and you know, COVID has really given us the opportunity to fill in a lot of those capabilities gaps out of necessity, really. So Teams is the de facto go-to app at Lancaster for meetings, for chat, for calls, and for lots of other things. So it really has given us the opportunity to fill in them gaps. And I think it's fair to say that pretty much all of our staff and all of our students in the main use Teams now on a daily basis for various different things. So something just to touch on next for you is about what we offer in the way of help and training, because I know this is very much of interest to those of you from other organisations, particularly those of you who might do similar roles to Lydia and myself around digital skills development, but also those who might do digital learning style roles as well. So our offering at Lancaster to our staff and students is varied and has developed a lot and come on a lot since March out of necessity, I guess. We offer a whole series of live training webinar sessions, and we also offer all of those as recordings as well. Now, we find both of these options to be popular. People really like joining the live webinars so that we can have some interaction, they can ask questions, geared towards their specific use cases. But we also find our recordings are very, very popular as well. I think that particularly students, but also staff, like that ability to watch back recordings of training that's taken place. And then they tend to use that in conjunction with our Office 365 user group or our other communities where they can ask questions around things they've seen in that recording. To back all of that up, we have a full communication and collaboration online course, and we did make that available earlier in the year to the wider community, to the NHS and so on as well. So I know that some of you will have seen our online course, and it includes help on virtually all aspects of Teams. It is customised around our particular implementation at Lancaster and some of our other technologies that we use at Lancaster, such as Moodle and so on. So it is necessary, we thought, to provide a customised programme of training around use of Teams. And that communication and collaboration with Teams online course is used in conjunction with all of these other things as well, so people can just dip in and out just to the topic that they're interested in. And we find that incredibly popular. It's had a huge number of hits over the last 9 months, continuing the upward trajectory it was on before COVID as well, actually. We also have lots of other resources, so we make available things like a webinar and meeting introductory template slides so people can download and use that. And we have a series of infographics, which are basically just one topic in Teams on a page. We have about 10 of those, really, really simple, straightforward, kind of no nonsense kind of guides to basic Teams topics. And I've just put down the right-hand side here, if we just move on, I've just put the details of some of the sessions we do. So we have, for example, a hands-on with Teams session, which is a 3-hour kind of long format, fully interactive session where we take a deep dive into a lot of the more advanced features of Teams. At the opposite end of the scale, we offer a half-an-hour introduction to Teams session, which is just covering the real basics of getting to grips with Teams for the first time. And then we've kind of got everything in between as well. So we offer some hour-long sessions that focus on specific areas like group collaboration and online meetings, or running live teaching sessions, or running live events for large audiences. And then in conjunction with the learning and teaching team, we also offer specific sessions on things like creating video lectures or using breakout rooms. So I think it's fair to say we've got a good coverage of a broad range of topics, and we continue to adapt that model in terms of what we're providing to our user community in line with emerging requirements and expectations, of which there've been a huge number of changes and over recent months, and I'm sure it's been the same in your organisations as well. Now, one of our biggest developments this year, I'm just going to switch to a live view of this so you can see the web page here, is our Embrace Digital web page. So this was a collaboration between lots of different teams at Lancaster, so digital learning, digital skills, our educational development teams, some academic contributors, lots of different contributors to this. And it's designed to help support academics and support staff with using digital technology for teaching and learning. So one of the key aspects of this is about setting expectations. So we developed some baseline standards, minimum expectations for the online and blended delivery of teaching. I'm sure that many of your institutions have adopted blended modes of teaching as well, so you'll recognise some of this. But this has been very, very useful for staff in providing a guideline expectation for different types of teaching, whether it's a lab or practical or a field trip, a workshop, teaching smaller groups. Lots of advice and guidance there to sort of set expectations both for staff and for students. Then to reinforce that and to really provide the guidance that our staff can use in order to implement and meet the expectations, we have a range of different options. I've already talked about some of the training options down here, but we have some formulas for distance teaching events. We have some case studies based around what other colleagues have implemented. And we've also got advice. This web page, Embrace Digital, is very, very much a pedagogical focus, but we've also got IT service specific advice as well. So we find it helpful both to come at things from the pedagogical, the teaching and learning focus side, but also from the specific, I need help with this IT service side. So trying to be pragmatic about how we support those different requirements, as well as guidance around accessibility as well. Other support options, and we'll talk about the Digital Education Network in a moment, but just so you can see one of our formulas, if we go into the formulas section here, if we go into, for example, small group teaching, you can see various different formulas based around what you might want to do in small group teaching. One of those is using breakout rooms, for example. And when you go into that, very, very basic, simple, bite-sized guides with quick solutions to achieving what you want to achieve within that small group teaching, pointing off to relevant training, a relevant recording, and further support if you need it as well. So like I say, this has been very popular with our staff this year as a development that's really eased the process of the transition to blended learning for many. I did mention our Digital Education Network, and I just briefly wanted to mention a couple of our online communities. So I'm sure in many other organisations you've been busy developing and bringing on online communities for both peer support and also professional support. Our first group started out life last year as the Teams user group, and that quickly morphed into becoming an Office 365 user group, where we basically a channel for people to post things they might have been struggling with, or ideas they'd had, inspiration they'd had, or things that had gone well for them, in order to share that with the community. And this very quickly expanded to open out to all of the Office 365 apps, and you can see there we've got channels for all of the different applications. And we found that this is very, very much two-way as well. So as well as being a community where people can post and get quick answers, whether from peers or from the staff that we have in IT services that monitor this, we can also use this, as you see on the right-hand side, for promoting upcoming training or events or new features. So we frequently post about new things that are being released in Teams. And that very quickly gives us a channel to communicate with our 700 odd members in a way that previous sort of communication mechanisms we've had at the university, we just have never had that quick and easy reach before. So within a minute or two, I can very quickly send an announcement out to the 700 people in this group, and we can get the word out there very quickly about new features as they come on stream. So that's been really critical for us this year. Now, the Office 365 user group, like I say, it was our very first community, and it started life being more about Teams support, but it's morphed from there. Well, this year, when COVID hit, we realised that we needed something slightly with a more pedagogical focus that helps people with some of our other applications around teaching and learning, so VLE and recordings and so on. And the Digital Education Network started out life as, I think it was called the COVID-19 Teaching and Learning Community. It had some snappy title along those lines. And when it started out, we had channels and topics based around individual applications. Now, its membership very quickly rocketed and shot right up. We had a huge number of academics join that, seeking support, as you can understand and sympathise with. And what we realised is that we'd created a new network, but we also had several other networks that had been popular with small, distinct groups of staff at different points in time. So we had a innovative education network that had a small community around it. We had a group called the e-learning folks. We had a community around online assessment. And what we decided to do is seek feedback and bring on board feedback from all of these different groups. with a view to really simplifying our offering in terms of community and bringing the community together into this single group, the Digital Education Network. This is very much linked in with the Embrace Digital website, and it provides a community. Now we decided to morph it into being more around the pedagogical aspects of teaching and learning. So if academics need some support or inspiration around inclusive practice or blended and distance teaching or student engagement, they can just come into here and post, and they will both get support from their peers and others who've had similar experiences, but also from the team of staff in IT services and in educational development who monitor this space. And again, we found it incredibly helpful to have a very quick way of communicating with very large numbers of staff about other elements of digital teaching and learning. So Moodle's being updated, you can see here, for example, or we've got a new training series being offered here. Just a couple of insights into these different groups. I've pulled the analytics pages for both of these groups out of Teams for the last 90 days. And you can see we've got around 700 users in this community, around 600 in the Digital Education Network. Both of them have around 400 active users on a weekly basis. And you can see the high level of engagement we get. So we've got hundreds of posts in each team and thousands of replies in this case. Lots of reactions indicating very good engagement and visibility of posts that are being posted. We very, very rarely have posts that go more than a day without being responded to by somebody, whether it's a peer or someone in IT services. And really, I think what this shows is the real success and the real popularity of particularly of the new group this year, the Digital Education Network, and the ongoing popularity of the other user communities. We've got other user communities around other applications and areas as well. But I just wanted to share this insight with you into just how we formed that. And I think the big success has been allowing its growth to be organic, trying in IT services, trying hard not to keep too much control over that for ourselves, not to limit it too much, but to allow the community to thrive and prosper and grow itself organically. So moving on then, just a couple of the other developments that I wanted to mention around Teams outside of teaching and learning, because we've got lots of uses of Teams and lots of staff involved in activities at the university outside of teaching and learning. This year we transitioned away from board packs for our committee management over to Teams. So over the summer, all of our major committees, our University Council and Senate, are now managed entirely through Teams. So all of the papers and as well as the meetings themselves, the guidelines and so on, are all now hosted and run through Office 365, which was an awful lot of work, and it still is an amount of ongoing work that we've got, particularly areas around external membership of committees and so on that we continue to work on and refine. But I think that's been a success story this year, and staff across governance and IT services worked hard on that. Another area where we made significant progress this year is with phones, or more significantly, a lack of phones now across our institutions. So over the summer, we removed around 2,000 phone handsets across our campus. So most of our staff now, the majority of our staff, don't have a phone number or a physical phone. So Teams is now the de facto standard way of doing all internal calling at Lancaster University. Some of our staff who required it for their role did retain soft phone functionality. At the moment, that's via Cisco Jabber. So staff can make and receive calls from home as well as on campus, so no need for a physical phone. But we have got a further project that is exploring whether to transition that remaining soft phone functionality and those phone numbers into Teams as well. So that would really help to create a unified communications experience, a unified experience for our staff, whether they are calling inside the university, whether they're using they're calling people outside the university who are using Skype or Teams in another institution, or whether they just want to call a good old-fashioned phone number. And we're looking at ways that we can unify that and bring that together. In terms of Lancaster University, that's been a huge sea change in the way that we operate as an institution since March. So before March, most people, or everybody, in fact, everybody had a phone on the desk. and now virtually nobody does. So a significant change, and one that I think we're really proud of, making that change in such a short space of time. And it's actually been very, very popular with a large number of our staff as well, having things all through one application, all of the calls in Teams. They can use it from anywhere. They don't have to be on campus. So a popular change. Another thing we've done that closely links to Teams and online meetings and online appointments and events is we've rolled out an application called LibCal. Now, some of you or some of your libraries in your institutions may use LibCal or the other SpringShare apps. We decided to roll it out right across our institution this year in terms of promotion of events and appointments. This at the moment was done rather than going down the route of rolling out Microsoft bookings, as some of you will have done. We don't have time today to talk about Microsoft bookings and why the decision was made about LibCal, but I'm sure that if you want to post something in the Q&A about that, I'm sure Peter will be happy to give you a rundown in Q&A or speak to you afterwards about that. But we decided to roll out LibCal, which is fully integrated anyway with Outlook and with Teams. And this has given staff the ability to offer one-to-one appointments. So for all of our academic staff and many of our support staff can now offer one-to-one appointments, which will automatically set up Teams meetings and send the Teams meeting link to the student or the person they're meeting with. And all of our major events now are organised and run via LibCal events as well, which is also fully integrated with Teams. So a platform that basically promotes events out to our internal event system in the university. It also supports registrations for all of our events and managing that, and it will automatically create meeting spaces in Teams for us. So a nice level of integration there. And again, we're really pleased to have made that step this year of offering fully integrated events and appointments management. Something else we've done that I mentioned last time is we still have at Lancaster, we use Moodle as our VLE. We're going to have a discussion around VLEs later in the session. But one thing that became apparent to us is that there were lots of different proposed approaches in departments about how to set up live teaching events, so seminars and other small teaching events. Some departments were very keen to set up Teams spaces and use collaborative team spaces, although at Lancaster we don't yet have the ability for those to be created automatically from student data. It's something we're looking into. So going down that route meant a bit of manual work for staff in departments. Quite a lot of departments wanted to make use of Moodle to distribute Teams meeting links, so we went through a process over the summer of determining the best way to do that and to support that. We have a plugin inside of Moodle at the moment that will generate ad hoc Teams meetings. And we've kind of done our best to support the quite different requirements that our diverse Lancaster University departments have got. And I'm sure that's the same in other organisations. Departments work in quite different ways and take a different approach. But I think it's fair to say that overall that's been, with a few little hiccups along the way, that's been successful. In the main, this term, students have successfully joined teaching sessions. They've successfully had a face-to-face online teaching experience. Like I say, with no doubt a few hiccups along the way, but in the main, I think that's been a success that we can reflect on. Now, I just wanted to touch on a few of the new features that have come on stream quite recently that have made a big difference this year. So I'm sure that many of you are aware of some of these features, maybe not others. Some of you may not have access yet to some of these features if they've not been widely released. That's just a caveat I would put in at this point. But for us, the ability to select the option within your participant pane in a meeting not to allow attendees to unmute, that's a really, really important one, particularly for those staff who run webinars and other online events. It makes a lot of sense to be able to stop your attendee group from unmuting themselves, particularly if you've got 300 attendees, as you now can in a Teams meeting. Also, the ability to, you can see here, set your meeting options directly in the meeting space. We find meeting options and configuration of things like the lobby and presenter settings as being one of the things that our staff struggle with the most in terms of digital capability, just because it can be quite confusing, the plethora of different options and the fact that only the meeting organizer can set those options. But the fact that at least that can now be done from within the meeting itself has made a positive difference. You can see here as well, one of the complaints about Teams back in March when we did our first webinar was, well, you can only have 4 people on screen at the same time. Well, they quickly expanded that right out, and of course we can now have up to 50, I think it is, in the large gallery mode, and they've released the together mode as well. I personally think the together mode is a little bit more of a gimmick. I've only rarely seen it used in genuine sort of teaching environments. The large gallery mode, though, is more useful, and I have seen that used more successfully where people have a genuine need to keep more people on screen at the same time as each other. Something that was released just very recently was the new sort of forms integration into meeting chats that allows you to create quick polls before a meeting. So that's been a really important development, I think, in terms of particularly around teaching and academic practice, to allow you to set up polls and then run them within a meeting without having to set it all up during the meeting itself. And then, of course, breakout rooms, which is currently still a preview feature for certain HE institutions, but that's made a huge difference. It's been well utilised and much appreciated this term. Having the ability to preview and to utilise that breakout room feature. A couple of the key training pages that have been really helpful this year, and I would advise any organisation in our same position to just have pages along these lines. I'm sure many of you have got them. One of the most common complaints now Teams use has taken off has been, well, how do I keep team spaces organised? Because I'm in about 100 teams and I don't know how to keep them organised. Well, these were our top tips around keeping multiple team spaces organised and reducing duplication. So some fairly simple stuff in here, and then some more sort of expert tips as well. But we found this to be very, very helpful to send out to those people who are really struggling with that idea that Teams is taking over my life. We hear that quite a lot now, and of course we have to be very mindful of the well-being aspect behind that. Linking meetings to channels as well, which I was discussing with some of my colleagues just recently about how this is a quite underutilized feature within Teams. So lots of advantages of getting your meetings linked to channels, including contextualizing the meeting and keeping the resources in the channel. And we think that really is the future direction of travel in terms of teaching and other use cases as well, where you have a group who meets on a regular basis. So we're continuing to refine our advice around that and to promote that method of working across the university. And finally, best practices. So, you know, we have a huge number of online meetings, webinars and other kind of online events that take place on a daily basis now, because that's the world we're in, and we're unlikely to ever move away from that position. We expect that this will continue, vaccine or no vaccine, that there will be a huge number of online events running in the future regardless. So some of our top tips around managing etiquette have been very well received. Some of the things that we advise you do. So spotlighting is one of the new features in a Teams meeting as well. We have a university template introduction slide. We have some university backgrounds for our cameras. You can see one of them that I'm modeling here. I'm not actually outside in a sunny Alexandra Square at the university. It's not that sunny. So various advice that we've got around the best practices for hosting meetings. That's just also been a very popular resource for people to draw on as well. Right, as it's halfway through, we're now going to open things up and give you the chance to have your say. We've put together a really brief Snap Forms survey, and we would like you to just go in and fill that in, just to give us some points to kickstart a discussion, really. You can either scan the on-screen QR code, or I've just posted into the Q&A a moderator announcement that should pop up as a moderator announcement, and you can click on that link to fill in the survey. So if everyone can either scan the QR code now on a different device, like on your phone or tablet, you can scan the QR code and fill that in on your device, or you can click the link in the Q&A as a moderator announcement. If you do have any other comments that you want to make about the contents of that survey, please just add in the Q&A. So I'll just leave the QR code up there another moment for you to scan if you want it before I switch it over to bring up the live results. So there's some, I'm going to invite my colleague Lydia at this point, because there's some questions in here about digital skills in different organisations and at an individual level, Lydia. So have you got anything that you might want to comment on about how we perceive our level of capabilities at Lancaster?
Yeah, I think so. So obviously the first question being around your own digital capabilities. I think every time I think that I am really getting to grips with everything the Teams has to offer and I'm a bit of an expert at it, it seems to change. They add a brand new shiny update, something like adding forms polling into Teams meetings, and then I go back down again, have to learn. So I think, as with all technology, it's one of those things that you just keep developing your skills at. No one can ever claim to be an expert because it's always changing. I think the most interesting, though, especially over the past 12 months, for example, is around the digital capability level on average of all staff. Because before COVID-19 and all of this happened, it would probably still got quite a decent digital capability level for quite a few staff, but it's definitely ramped up now that everyone's had to just adapt to overcome some of the challenges. Certainly, a lot of the online lectures having to take place, lecturers having to learn how to record their own videos, where to host them, how to add interactivity into these videos, for example. It's definitely been a case of a quick learning curve, but everyone's really risen to the challenge, and we're seeing a lot more engagement with not just the basics that they need to do their role, but people looking to get into some of the more complex things. So there's quite a few departments now setting up Power Automates to make some of their workload a lot quicker, and all other different types of 365 apps and beyond, as well as just the bare minimum that we'd expect and need them to do.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Lydia. That's really insightful. It's good to get your opinion on things. So we can see that we've got quite a few responses flooding in now. So I'll just give it another refresh, and I'm just going to maximize this. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to click the QR code and fill that in. So I'm sure there's a lot more people who are still partway through their responses as well, but we've got some responses in. So it's quite interesting, and I guess to be expected that the people who are joining this webinar today rate their own digital capabilities significantly higher on average than the average capability level of all staff in our organisation. And I found that quite interesting that it's about an average of about 5 stars. And when we did this exercise earlier in the week, just with my team, I found the results were strikingly similar to this, actually, which is really interesting. So I think what this clearly shows is that that we've got a lot of room for potential within our organisations to really develop this on and to develop digital capabilities in our organisations. Now, I'm sure that many of you, I'm just going to give this a refresh to make sure that we've got the most recent response data. So you can see we've got more responses in now, and actually those averages have stayed very similar despite the doubling in the responses. And what training do people find the most beneficial? So this is orange is first choice, with blue as last choice, and I'm sure that many of you will find this of interest as well. So live training webinars, I guess unsurprisingly, people still want that face-to-face contact with a digital skills expert. So unsurprisingly, that always comes out on top. And actually for me, online self-study courses, that would have probably been one of my top choices as well. So as I said at the start, at Lancaster, we find that incredibly compelling for many of our staff. I think it's the fact that people can dip in and out when they like and as they like. Recordings, again, unsurprisingly for us, based on what I said before at Lancaster, that's incredibly helpful as well. And actually, I think it's quite interesting here that videos have come out as the bottom ranked item in the list. We used to create quite a lot of training videos around key topics, but we've actually reduced the number of videos that we create overall this year. I think that I quite often hear comments that videos, for some people, videos are like a good choice. You know, people will search YouTube and they'll have a look at a video, but I think one of the comments that we get a lot is that a lot of videos tend to be out of date, or they're out of date very quickly. And at Lancaster, certainly, we found them that they're quite time consuming to create, which means they do go out of date quickly. So quite interesting there. And how important are these Teams features? I'll just give it another refresh just so we can see if that's changed things at all with additional responses coming in. So we've got again, so this list this time is blue is the important end and orange is the least important end. So interestingly, breakout rooms coming in, people saying that's extremely important. So I think we can all say a big thank you to Microsoft for really putting a lot of energy and focus behind developing those features out and giving people more options this year on that. Large gallery mode, so lots of people saying that's important. Live captions, of course, are going to come out as very important this year. I think obviously you've got the inclusivity element of live captions, but I hear quite a lot of people saying, you know, it's just great if I'm in a loud room, I've got the kids at home. I just like turning that feature on in meetings. Ability to stop and pretend from unmuting, so I mentioned that one. That's really interesting as well. The way that's come out. And quite interesting, the Teams live events are what we're putting on today. Not quite deemed quite as important as some other things there. So really interesting. And then we've got a list of responses about what features would you most like to see in Teams in the future. And hopefully we'll be able to pass that anonymously back to Microsoft as well, just to have that helpful feedback. And it'd be nice for us to compare that with our institution. So you all got a link to these results at the end of your survey, so you're very welcome to look at that and use that very snap poll information, that quick information we've got there in any way that you like. Just quite interesting for us to open up a bit of discussion around that. And speaking of discussion, we're now going to just open up and have a couple of different discussions around different topic areas that we think and hope will be very interesting for the wider community, as well as just for us at Lancaster. So we've got a couple of sort of deliberately provocative question areas that we're going to focus in on. And the first one of these is what actually is the future of the VLE? And when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, actually, what does VLE mean? We sometimes forget that it means virtual learning environment. And for many of us, that virtual learning environment, the place where the most learning has taken place this year is in Teams. So a few sort of things to be thinking about there. Remember, please, if you do want to comment on anything at all in here, please do add your comments into the Q&A. I know it's called Q&A, but please just add a comment. We'll publish it and we'll incorporate the things that are upvoted into our discussion. But I'm just going to invite Dale, one of our digital learning facilitators, just to open up the discussion about this.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I mean, it's a constant question that does come up across the institution and the sector when you're looking at virtual learning environments. And I agree with your comment there about the term VLE, and it's something I've spoken about at various conferences about the approach taken. We often get kind of taken up with this thing about a VLE, whereas if we just think about it in those terms, of virtual learning environment, it can be a collection of tools that you make into that virtual learning environment. I think one thing we tend to do is we want one thing to do everything. And I think at times that does limit and inhibit the teaching, learning and assessment practices that we can gain. So I think from my perspective, I definitely see a shift in expectations and in what people think a VLE should be now, because as you said, the scenario we're in now, where predominantly we're online, has kind of shifted the thoughts on what we want from a virtual learning environment. And I think what Teams and Zoom and other products have done has shown that we can deliver both synchronously and asynchronous content, which in more traditional VLEs, that isn't something that we could kind of readily do. It's generally more towards the asynchronous delivery. And when I think of VLEs now, I think of learner management systems rather than teaching and learning, which is something separate to I think what we can achieve in Teams and in the kind of the structure that you can create within that space. I think when it comes to students, I've seen a lot of comments, positive feedback from staff at the institution who have developed kind of teaching and learning within teams, and the students have reacted very positively. They can see the value going forward for the world of work as well. And I think, again, something I've spoke about in the past is about kind of having future ready graduates where they won't, or I would very much doubt they would come across a traditional VLE like Moodle, Canvas or Blackboard in the workplace, whereas Teams is something that they're going to encounter more often than not in various types of work. So there's various facets that you could kind of delve down when it comes to a virtual learning environment, but I think there definitely needs to be a discussion around what is a virtual learning environment and whether the traditional VLEs are now kind of fit for purpose in what we would expect will be a shift in kind of landscape in education, with possibly a focus on more kind of a hybrid approach to teaching and learning, where the blurred lines between kind of online and face-to-face are becoming ever more closer now.
Yeah, I've got a couple of community comments on this. So Thomas has said that his impression is that students are increasingly using their mobiles for consuming content, and Teams works a lot better on mobile than Moodle. So do we see a push towards using Teams as kind of one app for everything, which is quite interesting? And then just another comment about somebody who's starting to use Teams structures to reduce admin around the sort of smaller, less formal meetings and so on. So there's still a place for fully fledged meetings and so on, but it's about reducing administration, speeding up meetings and turning around skills. So a couple of good comments there. Does anybody else want to come in? Peter, do you want to come in with a comment about the VLE topic?
Yeah, I think it's important, and I realise I'll keep this short because I think there's a lot of academic colleagues on this call. But when we launched Teams, we deliberately took the view that it was a collaboration tool, and that was for all members of staff and all students, which sort of led to some of the decisions we made about availability and openness. It also has led to us being one of the biggest pushes for better auditing in the solution, so that we can allow people to work freely and not tie people down, because we can actually manage the situation if anything does go amiss. Not that anything has since we've launched it, but it's important to remember that we balance the two different needs of fair and equal collaboration against the structure that Dale's referred to that you see in an old style VLE. And I think we've done quite well, because we then have two different methods of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of comments from the community again. Edward from Solent Uni says that Microsoft see themselves as the central point of the VLE, and he finds that Moodle is far better at self-paced, asynchronous, narrative-based delivery, things like H5P and quizzes and so on, whereas Teams is far better at communications, chat, synchronous meeting, mobile, which is interesting. And
I think that's fair, Ben. I think that's a lot of the. There's a lot of people have found the strengths over COVID of Teams, and have also found the weaknesses, and a lot of the weaknesses around scalability of some of the interfaces in the back end, because Teams, I'm sure Microsoft will admit, was something that came out of the back door, almost a skunkworks project that suddenly took off. And so there's a lack of back end management, which is being addressed really quickly by Microsoft, to give them lots and lots of credit, but there are still weaknesses in handling bulk users, content management, things like that. So we've picked a way through that tries to play to those strengths, as you say.
Absolutely. Anne made a good point. I'm definitely going to say this wrong. Galindria, I'm not even going to. Why did I even try? From somewhere in Wales, I think. She understands that students will use Office 365 a lot more than a traditional VLE when they leave education and go into employment. I think that's a brilliant point, Anne, isn't it? Although you have expressed some concerns about price increases on software, and what happens when we start only using Microsoft Office 365 as our only only VLE space. So I think there's some interesting points there. And I think there's a good point raised as well, that somebody says, what is the potential value for an existing VLE? What does it offer that cannot be done in Teams? I wondered if Stephen might want to comment on this as a bit of a Moodle expert in our institution.
Maybe not.
If Stephen's there.
If he's not there, can I pick it up, Ben?
Yeah, you can.
Just wanted to, I think, following on from Peter's comment about the asynchronous being kind of tailor-made to Moodle, and I can see the point in that, and I think it's more that we've kind of conformed to that approach across the sector. But what I would say is that with good kind of learning design in Teams, that's far. I think we can exceed what's possible in traditional VLEs with the structure and setup in Teams, because with traditional VLEs, you get kind of the standard package, so to speak, the build, and then you get a lot of the add-ons, so the things like plugins and things in Moodle. Whereas with Teams, you've got really a kind of possible blank canvas there, where you can utilize not just some of the apps that are kind of the integrated apps, but because of the other tools you can draw in, you can bring in websites, you can bring in all these other things. So when you're talking about kind of the synchronous learning and the structure, generally what we find is on the majority of VLEs, you have a document repository or a link farm where it's just pointing you out to different sources. Whereas what you can do in Teams, you can structure it exactly the same as it would be in a traditional VLE, but you can bring in the kind of the collaborative and the interactive elements that are required for effective teaching and learning. So I think, like I said before, it's not a case of thinking of a VLE. It's gone beyond a VLE now. I think that's the important point. It's not just about kind of either or. It's about thinking about the teaching and learning first and what we need to do and what we can do with the technologies available. Whereas I think at the minute we're kind of constrained by thinking, but we've always had this, so we need to continually use it. And I think what we've got to look at now is shifting the discussion a bit and thinking, right, well, based on teaching, learning, assessment practices, what would we like to do and what can we do now with the technology available? Which I think, again, we're not quite there yet, because we tend to conform to this, right? Well, this is how we've always done it. Like the lecture, the big hoo-ha around, right, we need to do lectures differently now. And you're starting to see some institutions say, do we actually need to go back to lectures as they were? So again, it's trying to shift the discussion that bit further now. Hopefully Stephen's available now. We can.
Thanks a lot, Dale. Yeah, it's great to get your insights. So thank you. Just we're going to move on to our next discussion in a moment. I'll just put the slide up for that. But just before we do this, just a couple of comments from people in the chat. You know, Martin from Buckingham, I think, has adopted the kind of hybrid model that we've seen with some of our modules, where you've created a Teams group for each of the modules and been adding a Moodle tab to your Teams, which I think is probably a hybrid that quite a few institutions have adopted. Although, you know, I'm guessing, Martin, you've had the same drawbacks with that to what we've had, where you've got two separate permission models to manage, two separate places that information might be. And then Susan says about, do any of our staff use Zoom and prefer it because we find the audio and video quality better? Yeah, I mean, Peter's responded in there just to say that we do have a small number of Zoom licenses. We did used to have more Zoom users, but since Teams features have really developed out, and particularly the breakout rooms and the large gallery mode are the big ones, but there are others as well. I think most of our staff now recognise that or perceive Teams as being a superior tool. Actually, I think mainly because it's fully integrated with other services. So in particular, things like recordings. You know, if you're using a team and the meeting's attached to the team, the recording just ends up in the right place, shared with the right people in a university system. So I think our use of Zoom is ever dwindling down as people switch and adapt to using Teams. But anyway, let's move on to our next discussion then. So I think this comes up quite often at Lancaster, and something that we talk about is what is the future of communications? What communication mediums between colleagues, between students, with externals are fit for the future? So I think that we talked a bit about phone numbers at Lancaster University and where we're going with, or where we have gone so far with phone numbers. But I think one of the main issues we come up against, and I've no doubt this appears in other institutions, is colleagues' understanding or lack of understanding amongst all of us really about the differences and the most appropriate times to use email, Teams chat, Teams collaborative group discussions, and then in some areas where you still have phone numbers where that fits. So I think that the whole discussion here is around what is the future of different communication mediums? Does email still have a place? So we'd be delighted again to hear your thoughts about this. Please just post in the Q&A like last time and we'll bring in your comments. But for now, I'm just going to throw off to Peter, who as Head of Communication and Collaboration at Lancaster is well placed, hopefully, to comment on this.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, I think the first point is a really good question, and I think for all the hundreds of people that are on this call, we probably have 100 different answers. Yes, of course, email still has a place. Email will never go away, even if it's as a reminder that you've got a Teams message, which does make me laugh sometimes. We've found that we've got issues with people trying to cross the streams, so to speak, between workflows. So rather than relying on building a workflow or a collaboration within Teams, they want to use Teams and email together, and that can be problematic. In Lancaster, we have specific issues with the way we handle email, which means we intercept email before 365 and to give all the services on the Lancaster domain. And that means that we don't allow email into Teams, but it also gives us the advantage then that we can force a discriminator between conversations that take place in email and conversations that take place within a team or a chat. And as Ben's alluded to, and there've been a few questions that I'm trying to keep in my head at the same time, so apologies if I go off at tangent. We've been heavy Skype for business users in the past, and we've looked at telephony integration and chatbots, which we haven't yet had the funding to launch. But we do see that the vast majority of instant responses, for want of a better phrase, and Lydia will correct me on that because we have another bit coming, but instant responses can be done better, more effectively in Teams and in chat sessions. It doesn't need an email chain for lots of things. It cuts down on email. It avoids spam because everybody's authenticated. And when you're talking about collaboration in Teams, where you're talking about project work especially, and you can use the channels to separate out different threads, and you're not being bombarded with 100 emails about one thing or 100 emails about 100 different things, you can go to the channel in the team to look at what you're trying to discuss or learn about without being bombarded with rubbish.
Yeah. Interestingly, we've got a comment from somebody about whether we see the iLancaster app as part of this fit for the future. So how do we get the Teams and the iLancaster app to complement each other? And in terms of student experience, will we stay with iLancaster or move away? And there's an interesting point there, so thanks for raising that. I think another comment as well, just before I go to Lydia to get her thoughts, is from Roz, who thinks there's always going to be a place for email. So academic staff in particular tend to turn off Teams notifications, and so they don't pick things up sent in Teams. And you've said about you do a blended approach of sending emails with a link to Teams notifications. Email can also be used in conjunction with tasks and things like that. So it is
a good point, and the notifications point is a really good one. And I didn't pick up on that, Ben, before Lydia gets me. We do try and educate people on the different levels of notification and using those appropriately, because that can it can be as much of a boon as a pain. But yeah, we do find it's a better place to be if you separate the streams. Absolutely. Do we still need phone numbers? Do you want to do, Lydia, before we go on to the phone numbers and the other 2 points?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and chat about what you were just saying, especially around where you've talked about notifications, making sure quite rightly that You've not got people having the notifications on at inappropriate times or inappropriately, mainly because of the second point, do our colleagues understand differences between email and chat and so on that point, there's always a bit of a difference in perception of maybe response times with likes of email versus Teams. With it being an instant messaging system in Teams, people do often expect an instant response. I think I just want to drum in that it's okay not to respond instantly. You don't have to drop everything just because you've got an instant message from Teams. I think one of the most useful things for me was the My Analytics tool that's just come out recently. Being able to set aside focused hours within your calendar, which also updates your presence in Teams, meaning that people have got an idea that you're not looking to be disturbed within that time period. I know that certainly with people working from home and having their officers being at their house, it's very difficult to switch off from being like, oh, I'll just quickly respond to this message because someone's just IM'd me in Teams. Making sure that you get your breaks, but also the time set aside in your calendar so that it updates your presence notification that you are busy and might not be likely to respond as instantly as people might have developed an expectation to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, just unfortunately, just looking at the clock and thinking we're going to have to wrap things up. Just before we do, the couple of contributions that I'm going to take just from the community. So Ayad made a great point. I think from Queens, it seems to me that email sits somewhere between the extremely formal paper-based communication, where that still applies, and the very casual Teams chat. And yeah, I recognise that. You know, GIFs and emojis in a Teams chat maybe less acceptable in an email. Edward said email. He prefers IMs through Teams, but it makes work management more difficult as the tasks are mixed up with the chat. And then you've got to throw in the rather confused picture around task management in Office 365, where you've got the To-Do app, the Planner app, the Lists app, the Tasks app. You've got quite a few different apps and options and how that all integrates together. I think no doubt will be developed and worked on, but yeah, I really appreciate your point there, Edward, particularly for those people who use email as a bit of task management. But unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap things up because it's just coming up to 1 o'clock. I just want to thank, first of all, everybody out there in the community who's commented. I'm really sorry that we've not been able to read out all of your comments. I've done my best to try and get to the key ones that people have made as we've gone through. Hopefully we've managed to reply to most of your questions as we've gone through today as well. But indeed, if you do need to follow up on anything, then please feel free to get in touch with us afterwards. So thanks to my fellow panelists today, presenters as well. So to Peter, to Dale, Lydia, and in the background we've had Stephen and Tony as well. So thank you. And yeah, for members of the university, I know we've got some people from the university. I say this quite often, and hopefully people from other institutions recognise this now. We talked about it earlier, but post in the Office 365 user group if it's specifically about Teams or Office 365 products, or of course the Digital Education Network on the pedagogical side. But if you do want to discuss anything with us, then my email address is there on my LinkedIn, and of course I can put you in touch with other people, the digital learning team or with the communication and collaboration team. And we like to think of ourselves as very open and collaborative at Lancaster, that any of us would be very happy to continue a further discussion with you and your institutions as well. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. I really hope that's been helpful for you, and we hope to see you again at a webinar in the not too distant future. Thank you.